The series that we are continuing on is called Why, God? Sometimes when bad things happen, we can't help but ask, why? Why is this happening? Why? What's going on? Why, God? Why? And we've been going through the book of Job, and I want to just pick up where we left off last week. We looked at the story of a man named Job. We learned a little bit about this guy named Job. He grew up in the ancient times. We don't know exactly what time period he lived, but we do know that it was a long time ago. And the Bible tells this story of something that happened to him. He was a real person. The Bible quotes him in a number of places. He was very wealthy. He owned a lot of cattle and agricultural things. And he was kind of a ruler in the land and well known by the people in the Middle East. And Job had everything going for him. Maybe like you may have things going for you. You may be living a very comfortable life, just I've got the car, I've got the house, I've got all this stuff going on. Then everything went south when his life just, like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, got turned upside down. Everything hit the fan, so to speak. And so what ended up happening was that we discover in this story that Satan approaches God and says, the only reason why Job is okay and why he's doing well is because you bless him so much. And so there's this thing that develops where we have this scene in heaven, and there's these conversations that occur where Satan says, just let me at him. Let me see what I can do to him. And I guarantee you, I bet you that he will turn on you. And so that's what we looked at last week, where we had a peel back look into kind of what happens in the background. And we find that he loses everything. He loses his wealth. So the 401k just poof, disappears. Imagine you wake up one morning, you check an email from Vanguard or whatever management company you have, what a brokerage. Maybe you have a lot of money in Robinhood or some other brokerage, and all of a sudden it just disappears, all gone. Your entire retirement gone into shambles. Just poof. So all his wealth, and in those days it was not only his wealth, but it was the inheritance for his children as well. All disappears. The Bible then, as we looked at last week, tells us that he then loses all his servants, so his safety. Usually people with a lot of resources and stuff, they had servants and people who helped run the household and run the cattle and do all this stuff. Well, those all were killed and taken away. So then he's losing safety. And then he hears that his kids were out having a party, as they commonly did. And all of a sudden, there was a big unfortunate event, and the roof came down on the house, and they all passed away. He loses his family. Then he ends up losing his health. He loses so many things that are nearest. He still has his wife, and he has his health. But then Satan goes back to God and says, let me touch his health. Let me see what I can do to him. And his whole body gets covered in sores. And I told you the story of what happened when I came back from the Dominican Republic, right? Where my body was covered in sores. And that is Job. The Bible tells us that he was so itchy with the sores that covered his entire body that he would use shards of rock and just shards to scratch himself. So he was probably all cut up and disfigured and didn't look the best. And of course, his wife told him to curse God and die. So he started having marital issues and the preceding of a breakdown for what later would become his wife leaving him. And in all this, the Bible tells us that Job did not curse God. Job stayed faithful to God, even though, as we look at the story of Job, we find and we see that it wasn't God who was bringing these things upon Job. It was the devil. And when we read the book of Job, we see that Job writes, "Blessed be the name of the Lord. He gives and he takes away." Job thinks it's God bringing all this upon him, but it's not really God. It's the devil, and we're going to find out more as we go through the book of Job. And as I was going through preparing for the presentation for this week, the Lord put something on my heart that I wanted to share with you in light of a number of things happening among our church and in light of this series. It's a story that I haven't actually shared much with a lot of people, but I think it helps us kind of set us in the right path in this Why God series. It's something that happened to me when I was about 19 years old. And it's a very strange story that I'm going to share with you today. It's very unique. And I've heard very few stories like this story as it is related to the book of Job in what happened to Job in some ways, or at least in what we are able to experience here in the book of Job. So let me tell you what happened. When I was 19 years old, this is before I started my career in pastoring. I was going to a local community college named Sierra College in Rocklin, California. How many of you guys know where that's at? Down there, right? A lot of you guys, right? And I had decided that I would start a campus club. It's a campus of about 20,000 students. And I just wanted to do something. So I got my friends together who were also Christian and Adventists. I said, let's start a Bible study group and let's put on events. And we would bring people from like Clifford Goldstein out, and we'd bring people from the Geoscience Research Institute, and we would do all this stuff to try and promote the idea of an intelligent designer and do all this stuff. We had a weekly Bible study in the cafeteria, because who doesn't want to have food and the Bible at the same time, right? We had all this fun stuff going on. Well, there was a friend of mine, young lady, and she started coming to this Bible study. And on one particular occasion, there was this guy that showed up with her. Now, let me tell you about this guy. This guy shows up, and I remember him walking up. He was dressed in all black. He had black boots on, black socks, black pants, a black belt, a black shirt, a black coat, even black hair. And he had a black hoodie on, actually. It covered his head, and he kind of tilted it down, and he kind of looked at you like this, like that, kind of hunched over. And I remember he was walking up slowly, kind of like walking up like this. And I was like, what an interesting individual. But I was like, I'm in charge of this thing. I need to, just embrace this person and care for him. And I remember he was kind of distant and kind of weirded out by my enthusiasm. And we had the Bible study, and he didn't say a word, didn't say anything. And over the next several weeks, he would come, and he would be there, and he just wouldn't say a single word. We'd try to hand him a Bible, he would turn it away, all that kind of stuff. Well, on one particular occasion, we had a big event, and usually the events that we had, they were big. We had this event was like 400 people showed up. It was in a big lecture hall. We had Clifford Goldstein, show up to this event, and he was talking about apologetics and the different philosophical ideas for why God likely exists. And so he was presenting that, and there were people from the audience debating and going back and forth. And overall, it ended really well. People were really receptive to it. A lot of people interested in Bible studies. And, after a big event, you're kind of wrapping things up, right? You're kind of just busy. You're doing this, wrapping this, picking this up, and all these things. I remember that as lights started kind of getting dimmed, the college staff was kind of waiting around like, all right, like, you guys going to go? It was like 10 o'clock. We started like at 7. So it was late, all right? It's 10 o'clock at night. And I remember that I saw this young man. His name was Shelby, um, and he was just kind of off in the corner. And I was like, oh, he came. This is so good. I'm so excited about this. This is great. And then I see my friend who had introduced him to the group, and she's like, hey, I wanted to ask you something. And I was like, sure, what's up? And she's like, hey, I know it's super late right now, but he lives like an hour and a half away. Do you mind if he just crashes at your place tonight? And, usually I was a pretty welcoming guy, but this guy gave me the creeps. And I'm just being real with you. And I'd never really had more of an interaction with him other than like, hey man, how's it going? And complete silence from him. I was like, this is kind of a weird vibe that I get from him. And I was like, you know what? Let me just figure this out. I'll figure something out. If I have to drive him an hour and a half away, I will. I'll figure it out. Well, she goes and tells him, yep, he says you can stay at your place. At his place. He says you're good. Now, I was renting a room from someone, and so, we had an arrangement that I wouldn't have people over and things like that. And so I remember that, I had this 5-speed manual 4-wheel drive Jeep. I love this thing. I wish I still had it, but I actually got it stuck in a lake. That's a long story. I was trying to impress a girl. Don't do that. All right. So she did not drown in that whole process. Anyway, long story short, back to the story. Event's over. We start walking to the car, and he starts talking like I'm so glad you're thankful that that you're good with this, and so on and so forth. We get into the car, we drive away, and then I go into the freeway. I'm like, oh, I'm taking you home. And he's like, as soon as he realizes I'm taking him home, he says, no, you cannot take me home. And I'm like, I have never seen someone react so strongly to the idea of going home. Like, what's wrong with home for you, buddy? And he says, you can't, especially not at night. Okay. And I was already getting the creeps out of this guy, all right? So, I was like, I'm being real with you. I was trying to get rid of him as soon as possible, okay? I'm being real here, okay? And so he starts panicking. You can't take me home. People will shoot you. Your car, you won't be recognized by my family. And it's bad. I cannot go home at night. I cannot bring you to my house. I'm like, and I'm thinking like, okay, maybe because I'm a stranger, whatever. He's like, I just cannot take you to my house. It just will not work. I'm like, okay. Look, man, I can't take people, I got to let my landlord know. He's like, dude, I can't really, please. I'm begging you, please. And he starts pleading with me to let him stay at my house. I'm like, what is this dude going to do? Is he going to plant a bug in my house? Like, what's he going to, this story is just getting weirder, right? I'm like, this is strange. So finally, I don't know what happened, but I caved. I was like, all right, I'll just bite the bullet. I'm taking you home, but we're leaving first thing in the morning because, I'm going to try and see if we can just make it just a quick night and then just go. So we drive to my place, we park, we get out, and I remember that open the door, I walk in, and then I look back behind me, and he won't walk in. And I'm like, okay, really? I thought you wanted to come to my place. And finally he walks in. And as soon as he walks in, he's like, it's really weird in here. I'm like, all right, I guess I need to get the air freshener going or something like that. Like, I thought it was clean. I like to be a clean person, but maybe I left a sock or two out. I don't know, like what he's saying. But he just kind of starts verbalizing this. He's like, it's very weird. It's strange. And he starts showing signs of obvious discomfort. And like he's gritting and bearing it. He's like, where's your room? Let's just go to bed. And I'm like, all right, after you, please, I'm like, And so he begins to work his way to my bedroom, and he sits on my bed, and he looks to the left, and I had a whiteboard with a Bible verse written on it. And he looks at me, and he says, it all makes sense now. And I was like, what makes sense? He says, I mean, I knew you were a Christian, but I didn't think you were a real Christian. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, when I walked in here, and I told you this is a weird story, okay? All right? You ready for this? Are you ready for this? All right? He says, when I walked in here, I couldn't sense any demons, and I felt the presence of God's angels here. And I was like, what? I was like, how do you sense this? He's like, oh, I'm a witch. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I practice the Wiccan religion. I come from a long line of people who practice the Wiccan religion. And he begins to tell me this story of everything that he does. And he's sitting on my bed in my room. And I've just invited this dude to spend the night in my home. And I'm like, God, the things I get myself into. Like, really? Come on. So I was like, you know what? Because I'm officially creeped out by this whole thing. And I'm like, I'm going to try to stay up as late as possible. And I'm going to play an interview tonight. We're going to play an interview, and I'm just going to start asking him. And I start asking him all these questions. And I'm a really curious person. And I was like, all right, tell me about why you're awake. And he's like, well, because that's, and so he starts telling me this whole story of his belief of, it, at least at this point in his journey, he thought that God was the evil one and that the devil was the good one. A totally distorted view. He begins to tell me about how he regularly went into these trances and would meet with a spirit guide and that would guide him and tell him to do all these evil I told you it was going to get weird, all right? They would tell him to do all this to cast these curses on people and how if somebody was, how most Christians, he could easily just do whatever he wanted to because he knew that they weren't really that committed to Christ. And then he told me this. I was like, he's like, yeah. Now this is somebody, let me tell you something. This here. This is where I was like, I had goosebumps going down my back, all right? This guy had never once opened the Bible. What did I just say? Never once opened the Bible. They have their own Bible, so to speak, in the Wiccan religion, where it's kind of like a commentary on the Bible. It doesn't include all the Bible, but it's like, and the whole purpose of it is focused at building animosity towards our loving God. It's totally twisted. And he's telling me all about this, and he's like, well, actually what happened in the Garden of Eden was this. And now, but he's never read the Bible. He's just read it from the own writings to his religion. And get this. He says, yeah, and it's the weirdest thing. He's like, one time I was in my meditation thing, and I was with my guide, and he's talking about this, right? He's like, I was with my guide, and he took me. You can't make this stuff up, all right? This guy. He says he took me to this library where I was able to read, and he would take me there routinely, and I would read these books. And one time I pulled this book out, and usually I would read books on to learn which spells to cast on people and what to do, this and that. And he says, I pulled this book out, and it just kept talking about how you want to do the worst of things on that God's, that's what he said, special day. He said, do the worst things from the hours of Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Just like, if you really want to get at him, just do the worst during that period of time. And he was like, I came out of that meditative trance with a resolve that day must have been a special day for God, for the Christian God, and that I needed to do the worst things on that day. This guy had never opened up a Bible. He knew nothing about the Sabbath. And I was like, wait, what did you just say? He's like, yeah. I'm like, you do realize that the Bible talks about the Sabbath and how, the Sabbath in Genesis, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, like, he's like, really? That's really interesting. Oh, that makes sense. He was like, not surprised by this, Like, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. This is unbelievable. He goes on, and he describes how he would go around and he could, he could see things and that we couldn't see, and like he would sometimes like go and like pray to the devil to do things to people that made him upset or that did things and so on and so forth. But again, the thing he constantly ran into was that if somebody was covered by the light of Jesus, that he couldn't touch him. And so there I am sitting in my bed, and he's sharing all of this. And I'm just like, I'm not going to sleep tonight. And it got to like 3 a.m., and I was so tired, guys. I mean, I'd had a really long day prepping for the event, and I was up till late, and now it's 3 a.m., and I'm exhausted. I'm so tired. So finally, I'm like, Shelby, I think we just need to go to bed. And I slept horribly that night. I literally, like, almost one eye open, one eye closed kind of thing. It was like I set my alarm for 6 a.m., and I was like, we're getting out of here. He shared so much about his faith and his resolve and his commitment to Satan. How he would spend hours a day sometimes routinely just in his devotions and worshiping Satan and Lucifer. He gave me a lot to think about, because I was like, man, this is somebody who clearly is serving the other side, serving the author of evil and selfishness, and yet, what am I doing? How much time am I spending with God who is love? So there we are. I take him out to breakfast, and he called some friend who picked him up, and that was the end of that. Or so I thought. Because later that week, guess who shows up again to the Bible study? Shelby shows up to the Bible study. He shows up to the Bible study, and what I found was that he noticed that even though he was so for his faith and his religion and worshiping the devil, somehow being in my home, and I guess through our interactions, it led him to kind of maybe, it was like a chink in the armor. It was like a little crack, and it kind of made him open to the possibility that perhaps he didn't have things correct in his mind. He started coming to the Bible studies, and he started interacting a little bit more, asking a few questions. And then I remember one time I preached at a local church, and he came because he happened to be interested in that girl who brought him. It's usually how it goes, I remember he was sitting all the way in the back. I was preaching in the front, and he was sitting in the back right around where Andy is right now. And I remember I made an appeal. For some reason, I was impressed by God to make an appeal for people to be baptized and give their lives to Jesus and say yes to a God of love. And it had been weeks of him coming to our Bible studies, mainly listening. weeks since that time in my home. And I remember that he stood up, and he was the only person who walked up and said, I want to be baptized. And after that happened, I started studying the Bible with him one-on-one. It was unreal, guys. It was unreal. I remember the first time he grabbed a Bible. I handed it to him, and it was like he was holding something that he had never held before. He started reading the stories. I took him to creation and how God had created the world, and he was like unlearning. Like he was like oh wait, so God did this, and as he was studying the Bible, he was then making connections with the stuff he had learned from his Bible, the Wiccan Bible, and kind of remembering contradictions within the text of his own Bible, of his old Bible. Does that make sense? Of the Wiccan Bible. He was making these connections, and I remember that after enough Bible studies, I asked him, hey, Shelby, do you want to, because he asked me, he was like, how do you talk to your God? How do you talk to him? And I said, you don't have to go through anybody to talk to him. You just open up your heart. Just talk to him like you would a friend. And he was like, really? You just do that? I can just do that? I said, yeah, you can just do that. Let's try that. And I remember hearing him pray. We were in a library of Sierra College. I remember for the first time, he closed his eyes and opened up his mouth and began to pray to God. And just try to communicate with God. And he said something like, God, I've never done this before, kind of uncomfortable. And he just began to share. And then when he was done, he was like, was that good? I was like, yes, you're fine, you're good. You're good. As Shelby's life started changing, he tried to keep it kind of under wraps. He didn't really share it with other people, specifically his family, because remember I told you he came from a long line of what? Of Wiccans, right? Well, on one occasion, he was given a Bible, and he made the mistake of taking it home. He had it hidden in a backpack, and nobody knew it was there except the devil. I told you, this is a very weird story. He had this Bible in his backpack, and his mom, practicing very, very high up in the Wiccan faith, and she was like, I guess the family started receiving what they started calling curses. And after inquiring with their own spiritualistic means, whatever, the mom received word. Again, I'm telling you, this is a weird story. She received word that there was something in the home that shouldn't be there. But she wasn't told what it was. And she started going, frantic, like, what could somebody have been brought into our home that is not approved by the powers that be? You know what I mean? And eventually word got back to Shelby, and he was like, I think I know what that is. Bad stuff kept happening to them, as far as things that they didn't want to happen, and the family kept, continued to become more and more upset about it, and unrest continued to get greater. And eventually, Shelby came out with it. He was like, well, I have a Bible here. And the mom was like, how could you? Of course. And she actually grabbed the Bible and she destroyed it. And when they destroyed it, all the bad stuff from all the what they claimed to be demons and everything like that stopped. Because as Shelby explained it to me, the other side, the enemy of God, was so upset that that Bible was present there. There's all sorts of other stuff I could tell you, weird stuff that happened to him. Eventually, Shelby made the decision to cut ties with his faith. And if I recall correctly, he received word from a member of his faith that that his life he was basically putting a target on his back as a result of leaving that faith. But he chose to still enter the waters of baptism and give his life to Jesus. Why do I tell you this story? No, Shelby, I don't see demons and angels when I walk around. I really don't. He was like, that's really strange. I said, what? Like, but he opened, in my conversations with him, he was like, yeah, like, he's like, for example, the devil has his structure. Like, there's a number of angels that oversee Sierra College, and then there's different regions, and then there's like somebody that oversees all those different angels, and there's kind of like a structure, he said. And so like when bad things happen, that just gets delegated to the closest person, the closest demon to the person that they want this done. And I was just like, this is really interesting. As I was getting to know him, it opened my eyes to it kind of was like a pulling back the curtain experience where I was able to kind of understand just a little bit more keenly that, as the Bible says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and kingdoms in high places. I wanted to share this story with you before continuing on in the book of Job, before diving back into the text. Because sometimes when we read the book of Job, when we look at these biblical stories, we're like, well, that was then. That was something that happened back then. And maybe you're new to the Bible. Maybe you're a little bit more skeptical and you're like, yeah, that's an older document. I wanted to give you the inverse, present day, real life experience of someone who knows somebody who was in that faith. And described something similar to what happened here in Job, where the curtain was pulled back. And I was able to, through the story of Shelby, kind of experience some of the workings of the other side. We live in a real war. As I got to know Shelby, it added yet another piece to the puzzle of why, God. Many times in my conversations with Shelby, he was like, yeah. He was like, this is before he'd given his life to God, he was like, yeah, I love doing things where I place curses on people and I make them blame God for it. Many times I was talking to Shelby, I was able to see, wow, here we are thinking that it's God doing this, and it's somebody else. It's somebody else. Job didn't realize that it was the devil doing these things to him. I'm not saying, and we talked about this last week at our second look class, I'm not saying that God doesn't lead us through places that are going to be growth areas for us. What I am saying, though, is that God will never use evil to bring about good. And God will never do evil to you. because it's completely antithetical to his character. What he does do is he will somehow, some way, take those lemons and rotten eggs that the devil throws at us and somehow make the most of those situations. And you may be sitting here today blaming God for what he did to you, or what he, led someone to do to you, or what he's maybe doing to you right now, when it could be someone else behind it all along. I want to challenge you. I want to invite you to think about the fact that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and kingdoms in high places. We sing our closing song. I want to invite you to think about this. And maybe you've come here with a weight on your shoulders. Maybe you've come here with a sense of grief or frustration, some sort of heaviness to you. Maybe there's something that's really eating up at you. Something painful that stings. I want to invite you to the two things. The first, to assign to its rightful owner. To assign to its rightful owner the origins of this pain. Because God is not the author of your pain. God is not the author of your hurt. There's someone else. The devil himself and his minions are the ones who have caused this. And the second thing I want to invite you to do, as we sing our closing song and our praise team comes up, I want to invite you to make this song a prayer. Whatever weight, whatever heaviness is on your heart, whatever concern, whatever's keeping you up at night, I want you to give it to God as we close today. I want you to say, God, this hurts. He knows. He wants to take that from you. He wants to be with you. He wants to give you peace. He wants to relieve your discomfort. He wants to strengthen you with his righteous right hand. I want to invite you to pray. God, we live in a world that is filled with so much strife. I mean, just this morning, I received a phone call with somebody so frustrated at the state of current affairs. And this week, there was a number of fellow brothers and sisters in the Philippines who passed away in a terrible bus accident. Adventists in the Philippines. Things happen in the world that are painful and difficult. And there's also things that happen where we have strife with one another, issues with people, perhaps in the church, in our families, with our children, and we think it's just between us. We think it's us against them. We think it's us against that political figure, us against that family member, us against that coworker, or that person who drives that truck with that flag on it, or that person who has that bumper sticker or that yard sign in front of their house, or that person who annoys us or drives us crazy. We think it's us versus them when it's really the devil versus us. Help us to remember and to put into practice this remembrance of the fact that the devil just lives and breathes like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, which relationships he may devour, which peace he may devour, which happiness, with which joy. Help us to remember to love the people that we fight with, that we disagree with. Because At the end of the day, it's the devil trying to pin us against each other. Protect your church, protect your people, protect the city, protect your state, protect your country, protect your world. In Jesus' name, amen.